Welcome to the ultimate showdown of flagship mini PCs. In the red corner, weighing in with a beastly 12-core 24-thread AMD Ryzen AI HX 370, packing 32 gigs of LPDDR5 memory and a 1TB SSD, it's the Beelink SER9. And in the blue corner, coming in strong with a 16-core 22-thread Intel Core Ultra 9 185H loaded with 32 gigs of DDR5 memory and a whopping 2TB SSD, give it up for the Geekom GT1 Mega. Which of these power pack contenders will be the true heavyweight in the mini PC arena? Let's find out who's the bigger mini PC.
It's the money.
Hey guys, I'm CJ with Elevated Systems, your referee for today's main event showdown between the two heavyweights of the mini PC world. Today, we're putting the top tier contenders from Beelink and Geekom head to head to see which one truly meets your needs, and more importantly, if either of them justifies that nearly $1,000 price tag. Here's what we got lined up. First, I'll unbox these mini PCs and see what's in the package. Then we'll crack them open to check out the internals and go over their specs and features. Once they're set up, we'll run them through a gauntlet of tests covering productivity, content creation, graphics, and gaming. And of course, we'll dive into power consumption, efficiency, and fan noise. So which one's the real flagship? Well, let's find out. Unboxing these mini PCs is practically the same experience, as most companies these days have settled on a similar packaging style. Pop the top and boom, there's the mini PC right on display. Both come in mostly recyclable fiberboard packaging with minimal single-use plastics, and gotta love that eco-friendly touch. Now, for accessories, they're pretty much in line. Both come with an HDMI cable, a 120-watt power supply. Geekom went with an inline brick for the power, while Beelink opted for a chunky wall wart. Plus, Geekom throws in a VESA bracket if you want to mount your mini PC out of the way. Out of the box, these mini PCs have leveled up from the classic 4x4-inch Nook form factor, now closer to a 5.3 inches squared. They're almost identical in size. The Geekom measures in at 135 millimeters by 132 millimeters and stands 46.9 millimeters tall, while the Beelink is a more squared 135 millimeters and just under 3 millimeters taller. When it comes to connectivity, the Geekom is stacked. Up front, it has four 10 gigabit USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A ports, a headset jack, and the power button. Over on the left side, there's a full-size SD card reader. On the back, you'll find the DC input, two USB 4.0 Type C ports with DisplayPort output. The left one even supports USB power input, two HDMI 2.0 ports for up to 4 displays, two 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports, and an additional 10 gigabit Type A port, and a USB 2.0 Type A port. For security, there's also a Kensington lock on the right. The Beelink keeps things straightforward with a power button, headset jack, and a 10 gigabit Type C and Type A port up front, plus an omnidirectional AI microphone array. On the back, you get a 10 gigabit Type A port, two USB 2.0 ports, a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, a DisplayPort 1.4, and an HDMI 2.1 port, and the USB 4.0 Type C port, enabling for up to 3 displays. There's also another headset jack and the DC input. Inside, we start seeing some real differences. Open up the Intel-powered Geekom, you'll find a pretty standard layout. Remove the bottom cover and internal heat shield, and there's a 2TB Crucial P3 Plus M.2 SSD. Below that is the Intel Wi-Fi 7 network adapter, a second M.2 slot for a 2240 SSD, and a 32 gigabyte kit of DDR5 5600 Crucial SODIMM memory. With the AMD powered Beelink, things get interesting. Popping the lid reveals a metal mesh dust filter and a stereo speaker module. Underneath, there's a heatsink covering the 1TB M.2 SSD and the Wi-Fi 6 adapter. It also has a second M.2 2280 slot for extra storage. However, unlike the Geekom, the Beelink's 32 gigabytes of LPDDR5 7200 memory is soldered onto the board, offering impressive speeds but no upgradability. Noticeably missing from the Beelink SER9 is a PCIe by 8 slot like we saw with the Beelink GT Ultra reviewed a couple months ago, and this is because the AMD processor doesn't provide enough PCIe lanes for this option. To wrap up the specs, let's dive into the APUs powering these mini PCs and see what makes each one tick. Starting with the Geekom, it's rocking Intel's top tier Meteor Lake processor, the Core Ultra 9 185H. This is Intel's first foray into its new tile architecture, where CPU cores, GPU cores, IO chip, and other components are built as separate tiles and then glued together on a single substrate. Funny enough, this approach has been AMD's bread and butter with its chiplet design in Ryzen CPUs for years. There's a ton of info out there on Meteor Lake, so I'll keep it focused on what's unique about this particular processor. The 185H is a 16-core, 22-thread CPU made up of 6 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores, and 2 low-power efficiency cores. For those who like the nitty-gritty, here are the core specs for each type. Feel free to pause if you want to study up. Other standout features include a configurable TDP that Geekom has set to its max of 65 watts with a sustained multi-core package power of 45 watts. It also packs an 8-core Intel Arc GPU and an Intel AI Boost neural processing unit. On the other side, the Beelink SER9 brings AMD's Strict Point APU to the table with the Ryzen AI9 HX370. This powerhouse has 12 cores and 24 threads split between 4 full power Zen 5 cores and 8 low power Zen 5C cores. Here's a look at the detailed specs. Again, feel free to pause if you want a closer look. The HX70 offers a configurable TDP range from 15 to 54 watts, but as we'll see later, it's tuned to sustain over 70 watts in multi-core workloads. Graphics-wise, it's equipped with AMD's Radeon 890M, sporting 16 RDNA 3.5 cores, and it also packs AMD's XDNA 2 NPU. Setup for each PC was identical after connecting my preferred display, keyboard, and mouse. Booting up both machines launched into a very familiar Windows 11 Pro installation. Once installed, as usual from both of these manufacturers, there was no extra bloatware installed on top of the already bloated operating system. However, it was curious to find that the Beelink SER9 came with Windows 24H2 pre-installed, while the Geekom GT1 Mega came with 23H2. Not a huge deal. The newest version will definitely help the AMD system, but the update won't have a significant impact on the Intel PC. Plus, as most of these mini PCs comes pre-installed with their own tweaked drivers, I test them exactly how they come out of the box until I can't. I'll get to that in a bit. I also did all my testing on the best performance power setting in Windows. With both PCs fired up, let's jump right into their performance. Now, full transparency, while the results from the SER9 and GT1 Ultra and the Minisforum UN1290 is fresh data, the data from the other mini PCs I've included is about a month old, so there have been Windows and drivers updates since then that may or may not have changed some of those numbers, so keep that in mind as I refer to the older generations. Now, starting with raw CPU power in Cinebench 2024 multi-core, AMD pulls ahead. The HX370 shows a 12.5% lead over Intel's 185H. It also boasts a solid 35% improvement over the previous gen Ryzen 9 8945HS in the Geekom A8. Meanwhile, the 185 shows almost a 15% improvement over the Intel Core Ultra 7 155H in the Beelink GT Ultra, and a 36% boost over the i9-12900HK in the Minisforum UN1290. When we switch to single core performance, the HX370 still edges out the 185H by 4.5%, while both CPUs show similar gains over their predecessors. In Geekbench 6, the SER9 continues to outpace the GT1 Mega with a 5.5% advantage in multi-core performance and a 10.1% edge in single core. Now, switching gears to Geekbench 6 iGPU compute performance, the Radeon 890M outpaces the Intel Arc by 13%. Both iGPUs also show significant improvement over their previous gen versions, especially the Intel iGPU. Now, before we dive into the rest of the benchmark, where spoiler alert, the AMD powered Beelink SER9 does lap the Intel powered Geekom GT1 Mega in most tests. I need to add a bit of perspective for the power efficiency crowd, because while the Beelink SER9 does beat the GT1 Mega by 12.5% in Cinebench, it achieves this by drawing up to 62% more power. Well, let's break that down. During a 10-minute Cinebench multi-core test, the Ryzen's package power peaked at 90 watts and then settled to around 70 watts. Meanwhile, Intel's package power peaked at 70 watts and then leveled out at around 45 watts. And we could get deep into CPU package power, core power frequency curves, and compare AMD's Zen 5C cores scheduling with Intel's PE and LP cores, but here's what really matters: what each system is pulling from the wall. Across every workload, the Beelink SER9 drew 30 to 50% more power. In the ultra demanding AVX Cinebench test, the SER9 maxed out at 120 watts, the limit of its power supply, which isn't ideal. It then settled to around 100 watts. By contrast, the Intel powered Geekom GT1 Mega peaked at just 100 watts, about 80% of its power supply max capacity, which is better, and then settled to around 65 watts from the wall. Now, there are ways to optimize the Ryzen for better power efficiency without sacrificing much performance, but Beelink went all in on max performance profile settings straight out of the box. So as we continue with the performance test, just keep in mind that AMD is pulling about 30 to 45% more power in each workload. And by sheer coincidence, we're kicking off with a test where the Intel powered Geekom really shines basic productivity multitasking with the Microsoft Office suite. Here, the Geekom takes a 12% lead. Now, realistically, even the biggest Office gurus out there won't notice much difference in day-to-day productivity, but where Intel's APU really excels is in tasks like converting PowerPoint presentations to video thanks to its top-notch media encoders. AMD's built-in media encoders, however, have seen major improvements, even supporting up to 8K 10-bit AV1 encoding, so apps like OBS and XSplit will perform well on the SER9, but when it comes to using these minis as HTPCs or media servers, Intel still has the edge. I set up Plex Media Server on the SER9, but couldn't get hardware encoding to initialize and had to rely on software encoding, not an efficient choice for a media server. And I will note that I run all of these tests last, as I did uninstall the pre-installed AMD Adrenalin drivers and installed the AMD Pro drivers for the non-gaming workloads. Now, moving on to some other tests, things got interesting. The SER9 edged out the GT1 Mega in the Puget Bench Photoshop test by 8%, led by 8.6% in Premiere Pro. And surprisingly beat the Intel PC by 12% in DaVinci Resolve. This shows AMD's media engine has definitely stepped its game up. However, when we remove the media engine from the mix and look at a real-world project, B-RAW and ProRes RAW footage, which relies on the GPU and CPU for decoding, that's where we still see some typical AMD challenges. For instance, I used a digital glitch GPU effect in this project, but the SER9 couldn't handle it and the render failed. The Geekom, on the other hand, rendered the 4K project in around 51 minutes, which is pretty solid considering the complex GPU effects and fusion elements in this video. But in a different scenario, the Beelink absolutely crushed it. In a 3D logo reveal in After Effects, the SER9 rendered the 4K project 55% faster than the Geekom. This is one test where the performance boosts outpaced the higher power draw. Looking at more 3D rendering in Blender, we see the results split. When rendering on the CPU, the Ryzen takes the lead, outscoring Intel by an average of 37% across the 3 test scenes. However, when using the iGPU as the renderer, Intel's ARC graphics won by 16%. All right, with productivity and content creation test wrapped up, let's dive into the gaming performance of these mini PCs, starting with our only synthetic benchmark. In 3D Mark Night Raid, the AMD-powered SER9 outpaces the Intel system by 10.5%. Now, I'll breeze through the gaming benchmarks since there aren't too many surprises. In Baldur's Gate 3, the SER9 pulls ahead by 40%, higher average FPS compared to the GT1 Mega, but notice the gains the integrated Intel Arc graphics have over the previous gen XE graphics in the Minis forum. The Radeon 890M graphics also shows improvements over the 780M in the Geekom 88, although those results are a bit older. Keep in mind that SER9's fast LPDDR5 memory gives it a significant edge over the A8's slower socketed memory. We see a similar 41% performance boost for the SER9 in Borderlands 3. Counter-Strike 2, however, flips the script. Not only does AMD fall 27% behind Intel here, but it also is outperformed by the older 780M graphics. I ran these benchmarks about a dozen times and the results are legit. My best guess is it's a driver issue. Sometimes updates can randomly nerf performance in certain games. The Beelink SER9 will also be in my next video. Well, I'll be comparing these systems to the new M4 Mac Mini, which should arrive tomorrow as of filming this, and I'll try rolling back the driver to see if that changes things, so stay tuned for that. Moving on, Doom Eternal runs 25% better on the SER9. Grand Theft Auto 5 sees a 19% improvement. And Shadow of the Tomb Raider gets a solid 39% boost. Overall, averaging the 6 game tested, the Ryzen-powered Beelink outgames the Intel Geekom by 14.6%. That CS2 outlier does skew the numbers a bit, but it's a valid result, so I kept it in. But if we take it out, the gap doubles to about 30%. Clearly, AMD still reigns supreme in iGPU gaming performance, but I have to give Intel credit for the huge strides they've made with Meteor Lake. Let's hope it continues. Strong competition means we, the consumer, are the real winners. One last area to cover before we wrap things up: thermals and fan noise. In terms of peak temperatures, the Intel CPU technically hits a higher max of 95C compared to 91C on the Ryzen, but that's basically a wash since the Intel chip has a higher TG max of 110 degrees Celsius versus the Ryzen's 100 degrees C. Neither CPU hit thermal throttling during stress testing, despite Hardware Info 64's occasional reports on the 185H. This is just due to Intel's unique boost behavior, where only 2 P-cores boost to 5.1 gigahertz, while the others max out at 4.8 gigahertz. The software flags this as throttling, but it's really just Intel's design. True throttling wouldn't start until about 105C, and no cores even came close to that. But while the GT1 Mega maintains good thermal uniformity and is generally more efficient, it can get pretty loud for a mini PC. In a real-world scenario like scrubbing through a resolved timeline, the Geekom hits around 50 dBA compared to just 37.2 dBA on the Beelink. In this head-to-head comparison between the Beelink SER9 and Geekom GT1 Mega, we've broken down design, performance, power efficiency, gaming, and thermals. The Beelink SER9 with its AMD Ryzen HX 370 excelled in raw performance, leading across creativity tasks like basic video editing and CPU-based 3D rendering. It also delivered impressive gaming gains. However, these wins come with a higher power consumption, around 30 to 50% more than the Geekom in every test. The Geekom GT1 Mega, powered by Intel's Core Ultra 9 185H, might not always top the charts, but it shines in tasks that benefit from Intel's media engine, making it better suited for productivity and more advanced video editing and GPU-based rendering. Its expanded port selection, including 2 USB 4.0 Type-C and dual 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports and quad displays, offers greater flexibility and connectivity options. adding to its appeal for productivity, media server, a home lab focused users. So for those prioritizing gaming and raw CPU power, the Beelink SER9 is a strong choice, but if you're looking for a more power efficient system with an enhanced expandability and a slight edge in complex computing tasks, the Geekom GT1 Mega is the way to go. Alright, that's it for today's epic mini PC showdown. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new here. I've got plenty more tech comparisons and deep dives on the way, including adding the new M4 Mac Mini to this showdown. Let me know in the comments which mini PC you'd pick, the performance powerhouse Beelink SER9 or the versatile Geekom GT1 Mega. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.